When we talk about the police, we often picture the most visible part: uniforms, patrol cars, someone stopped or arrested. But policing is bigger than that. In this episode of Direct Action 101, we're digging into the surveillance side of the state, the less visible, more constant ways we're watched and tracked every day. From your phone's location data, to Ring doorbells in your neighborhood, to facial recognition at protests and beyond, surveillance has become a part of everyday life. And it's not just about preventing crime, it's about control. It's about manufactured consent. This technology didn't fall from the sky. It's funded by governments, sold to police departments, used to target the same people the system always has: Black folks, undocumented folks, poor folks, organizers, and beyond. Surveillance is a pillar of modern policing, and to understand policing and how we can protect ourselves, the ways that the state tries to curb against our privacy and sow dissent in movements, we have to understand how it watches, categorizes, and punishes, even when no one's wearing a badge. Welcome to Security Culture 101, Part 2, The Tools of the State.
It's not really an innocence as much as it is also a global perspective that's pretty extraordinary. There's simply no way to predict that this revolution will come to an end. What will be next?
I'm really glad that folks have enjoyed part 1, and part 2 is going to be a little bit more of an extension. We're going to be talking about the tools of state surveillance, the mechanisms that go into these tools, how these tools work, whether it be drones, whether it be CCTVs, whether it be social media scrubbing, whether it be physical surveillance, infiltration, entrapment, so many other things. And I've done so much research into this video. All of these videos, I've done so much research. So if you want to show some love, go to the comments, hit the notify button, because that helps boost this channel. And after part 1, this video felt necessary as well, because some of this is about the logic of policing. Some of this is about the industry and infrastructure of policing, all of the money that goes into carcerality and surveillance. It's a massive industry in the US and globally, especially now as there's rising fascism. Because, I mean, look at the weaponry stocks post this most recent Nakba against the Palestinian people. So it's important to think about all of those things when deciding how we want to operate on a security culture level within our own framework, based on the surveillance that you're facing, based on the ways that different modes of surveillance can detect or gain information from you. You react and resist accordingly. And that's what this video is going to be about. So this video is going to be helpful for folks that got like a base level of knowledge from the first video, but want to dig in deeper. And it's also going to be helpful for folks that have some kind of sense of what security culture is, some kind of sense of the different ways that the state can survey us, but maybe you don't know about the specifics and you want to dig into it more, and you maybe want to use this as a resource to help folks around you. And in part 1 of this video, I really want to dig into what is policing and the illusions of the logic around policing.
The law enforcement officer approaching the group, the nightstick, the uniform, creates a hostile, menacing image.
It's ruined my mother.
Unnecessary physical contact further escalates the sense of hostility.
Where's your permit? Oh, it's in my other pants, man. Where's your other pants at? In my closet. You don't look like you have. Hey, get off the car. Get your hand off the car. Get off the car. Get off the car. Off the car.
This arbitrary and threatening attitude is seen as further proof of hostility.
Get off. What do you got to do with it? No more. I'm with you. Back up the car. Get off the car. Off the car. Get off the car. Hey, tell me you tell this man this car. Come on, man. Let's go. Get off the car, punk.
When viewed through the eyes of the group, it is therefore no surprise that this interpretation may result in the situation.
On a socio-political level, we are born and raised in a world where we're taught either police fucking hate you because you're black, you're trans, whatever, so be careful, say yes sir, no sir, don't end up like these horror stories throughout history, which is that police in the state exist to exercise a monopoly on violence. So manufactured consent, crisis, and surveillance become normal. As a qualification for citizenship, this is why knowing the tools of the state and state surveillance helps us in making movement stronger. Or you're taught that like police are there to protect you. Like if you're not doing anything wrong, right? Like what's the big deal? Like what's the big deal?
understand slave patrols, it's important to understand the slow development of the state intervention in maintaining slave society, beginning with simply passing laws that would restrict the activities of the slaves, and then laws on their own being insufficient, authorizing any adult white man to enforce those laws, but then the reliance on individual action proving insufficient, forming into this body called the slave patrols that were an offshoot of the militia and worked as kind of a voluntary compulsory organization, meaning that participation was mandatory, but it wasn't a professional outfit. That provided a way of making the entire white male population directly involved in maintaining slave society. As industrialization came to the South and there were larger slave populations in southern cities, the slave patrols moved similarly into the city. And there they became professionalized, and very quickly their duties expanded and they became a body that we would immediately recognize as modern police force.
Overseer, from overseer. You need a little clarity? Check the similarity.
And now, 200 years later, the basic function of the police is largely the same. It's maintaining the stratified nature of the society, both in terms of race and class.
You look at the whole concept of white supremacy and how that fits into the counterinsurgency on a historical basis. Of course, the oldest terrorist organization in the United States, which is the Ku Klux Klan, that was a group that was founded right after the Civil War to inflict terror against the African people in the United States who had been newly freed from slavery and who were beginning to try to organize. And then as you move on into the 20th century and the civil rights movement began to develop, the Klan and other groups would work alongside the police, whether it was local police or whether it was sheriff's departments, and they would work together to inflict terror, to restrain the movement, the organizing against white supremacy.
And something that's been helping me reframe this even more as an abolitionist has been reading Police, a Field Guide. And this book is really amazing because it just really eats down in the way it talks about policing. It literally talks about all of the different tools that police use. It talks about the different ways that they use these tools and the logics around it. And I want to bring in a definition from Max Weber, and the definition reads, it's from Politics as a Vocation by Max Weber. And in it, it reads, quote, "Every state is founded on force. Trotsky said Trotsky at Brest-Litovsk. This is indeed right. If no social institutions exist which knew the use of violence, then the concept of the state would be eliminated, and a condition would emerge that would be designed as anarchy in the specific sense of the word. Of course, force is certainly not the normal or the only means of the state. Nobody says that, but force is a means specific to the state. Today, the relation between the state and violence is an especially intimate one. In the past, the more varied institutions, beginning with the SIB, have known the use of physical force as quite normal. Today, however, we have to say that a state is a human community that successfully claims the monopoly of the legitimate use of physical violence within a given territory. Note that territory is one of the characteristics of the state. Specifically, at the present time, the right to use physical force is ascribed to other institutions or to individuals only to the extent to which the state permits it. The state is considered the sole force of the right to use violence. Hence, politics for us means striving to share power or striving to influence the distribution of power either among states or among groups within states. If you go back to the US, why the US is fascist video, this logic, I think, is kind of underpinning that. Like the idea that the state is fascist, the idea that the state is anti-Black, that so many of the social institutions that operate globally and nationalistically across different parts of the world legitimize violence against Black bodies. And if we take that further, the state as an institution legitimizes violence against poor people, undocumented people, trans people, women, Black people. Really look at the state. I mean, we can look at violence as physical violence, carceral violence, economic violence, environmental violence, political violence, if we can analyze all of the different ways that the state enacts violence upon communities, we can begin to understand that security culture and collective care and self-defense is actually how we begin to understand and look at the realities of the state, and where we can begin to imagine for ourselves what a better community can look like that is excused from the forms of violence that the state operates as we see it.
Patriots.
MLK was called a terrorist. He was on the FBI watch list.
Why, he was like nice.
No. He was freaking ruthless.
I'm sorry, you're trying to equate civil rights movement to what we're doing here?
I mean,
Look,
it's kind of similar.
anytime anyone has challenged authority, they call it terrorism. And then when the terrorism works, they lie about the legacy and they say that it was all passive, nonviolent, kumbaya shit when it's
not. If the American empire calls us terrorists, then we're doing something right.
Fuck yeah, what he said, exactly. People talk shit about me my whole entire life. I don't
Jesus was a terrorist.
And one of these forms of violence is surveillance. It is surveillance. Policing as a paternalizing force. And this is a key part of the logic of policing. Policing isn't really about safety, it's about control. The everyday tactics and routines of police work reveal a deeper logic, one rooted in coercion, punishment, and the defense of state power, especially against the poor, the racialized, and the politically active. One of the things that I want to read about from Police A Field Guide is how they talk about pain
if he complies with what I'm doing, simply sit here and hurt him. The response to that is responding violence. When I tell him get down, I make a verbal contract with him that if he complies with what I'm doing, I will take away the pain.
Wow. This is where I think political reading is so useful. Like when I read this, I was just like, oh, that's literally how I saw police, but I didn't really know that there was a phrase for it. In Police A Field Guide on page 61, it reads, pain is the adjective that clarifies police power. According to Samir Ezimer, the criminal justice system is unfathomable without pain. Without pain, police have no authority. The police inflict pain and are the sole authority to relieve it. And this serves the same legitimizing purpose at the heart of the criminal justice. Law, Ezimer argues, openly sanctions the infliction of regulated pain. Law endorses the pain police impose. Pain is instrumental to another purpose, compliance. Police use pain to modify behavior. Pain makes non-compliant subjects compliant. For police, pain is depicted as a discrete tool or technique administered on non-compliant subjects. The police threaten and produce suffering, and therefore produce the suffering subject, a subject who does not exist outside this relation. Only a sufferer can be the proper subject of police power, and only police can measure suffering. Only police can determine compliance or non-compliance. It is equally the job of the police to impose pain as it is to measure its effectiveness. And since, to police, pain is always effective at creating compliant subjects, pain is not present if compliance is not achieved. Consider what this implies. Police claim the power to administer pain in order to create suffering, and also claim the power to unerringly interpret another's suffering. It implies that the police have secret knowledge of another person's consciousness. And this goes on to talk about, this includes the use of pepper spray and tasers, the hog-tying of suspects, and the hyper-flexing of their joints. In the case of Eric Garner, the chokehold. Eric Garner died in a chokehold while saying over and over again, "I can't breathe." The officer did not loosen the chokehold because it was the police officer, not the subject of the pain compliance, who measures the pain.
Maximum strength should be directed against a point of minimum strength. The finger lock, more effective than a strenuous counter-assault. Despite physical appearances, always assume that your adversary possesses greater strength. Then use your strength to direct his movements. By pulling when he pushes, pushing when he pulls, it is possible to use the adversary's strength and momentum to your own advantage.
I really cannot tell you how much this explanation blew me away, because it makes me think about corporal punishment. It makes me think about Black families and discussions that we have about whipping your children and not using the master's tools to defeat the master's house. How violence operates on a socio-political and interpersonal level, sometimes it is to force a kind of compliance, especially when I think about masculinity, when I think about gender, when I think about patriarchy. But when we reel it back to this, it really shows us that we look at it from so many perspectives. We can look at it from the racialized perspective, from the eugenicist perspective, the idea that Black bodies literally don't experience pain or experience less pain, the fact that there are certain kinds of people that are uncivilized in the eyes of the state or white supremacy or the white ethno-state, and that therefore makes their bodies more susceptible to pain. I mean, think about kids being locked up in cages, being given blankets or food or translators under the Trump and the Biden administration in terms of their child separation policies at the border. I mean, think about the horrific videos we're seeing of ICE arresting people in front of their whole communities, mothers sobbing while they're holding on to their children. Think about the Israeli relationship with Palestine. The collective suffering and torture that the Israeli government is forcing Palestinians to go through is another form of pain compliance. So if you look at our world, if you look at capitalism, if you look at white supremacy, why the fuck is it so important for the civilized nation, for the civilized entity to use pain to legitimize their power? And to break it down even further, this can look like arm twisting, wrist locks, neck-on-neck holds during routine arrests, tasers used on people already restrained, pepper spray at close range. Have I been fucking pepper sprayed at close range at a protest? Was that a form of pain compliance? Did it work? No, it didn't. Yesterday I was reading Ready for the Revolution, which is Kwame Ture's autobiography. But there's a part of it where he talks about but it was a really famous farming and working jail in the South during the civil rights movement, where folks who could be arrested and literally forced to work on farms, and they had cattle prods and all these other horrific torture devices. And Kwame Ture talks about their time being incarcerated there and going on hunger strikes and resisting the conditions in this jail. And this quote really stuck out to me, and it reads, quote, "That's when Tyson introduced us to something that I've never mentioned in anything I've read about torture in America's prisons, something they call wrist breakers. These were vice-like metal contraptions that were applied to the wrist. One metal clamp went under your wrist, another fit over the top. A bar above the top clasp had a threaded hole in it, which a T-shaped rod also threaded was screwed. By screwing it down on the upper clasp, the pressure on your wrist could be increased unbearingly. It was essentially a small vice. The pain was excruciating. If you tried to ignore the pain, they twisted it laterally so you could feel the bones in the joints of your arm about to break. Involuntarily, your whole body would have to follow your arm. You'd leave your feet and flip over like a fish. If they continued to twist, you'd find yourself rolling over on the floor, following the pressure of your arm." Oh my God. So they think we're uncivilized. The other side thinks we're uncivilized. They think we're uncivilized. People do not deserve the violence of the state. The state does not have some intrinsic moral higher than thou right to torture people. When I talk about policing in general as an abolitionist, and this was something that really struck me during the 2024 election, and people were arguing with me about not wanting to vote Kamala, it's difficult for me to have a conversation with certain abolitionists because we don't situate the state's violence past statistics. We don't situate the state's violence past like the numbers and the qualifications and the things that intrinsically let us know like it's fucked up. We can't have restoration until we measure the extent of the harm. Every broken wrist, every broken bone, every traumatized human being that had to process their trauma and PTSD. And then we think about the literal physical violence of the police. To be a revolutionary, to be a radical, it usually means you have to be willing to face pain, to face suffering at the hands of the state. It's kind of a part of what Huey P. Newton was talking about in Revolutionary Suicide. To live a reactionary death is to try to soothe yourself amidst all of the evils and harms of the state. To live a revolutionary suicide, a revolutionary death, is to live with dignity, to defend yourself against the state, to not take this shit on the chin, to resist. And when I read about pain compliance, it really sobers me to I can be as brave as I want. Bravery reaches a different place when you know you're going to have to experience pain for the things that you believe in. And this is kind of the core of it for me. We don't deserve this for wanting liberation, for wanting a better world, for wanting an end to capitalism, white supremacy, etc. But the state is going to try and rock your shit. Where the fuck does surveillance start other than inner city fucking schools? How many schools did I go to that had vests, weird, creepy fucking security officers? And there's some examples of pain compliance that we can look at. We can look at the torture that occurred with Line 3 protesters.
They basically hold you in a headlock and then focused first on a pressure point that's right below my ear. Forced his thumb in there for probably 30 to 45 seconds.
So he like grabbed the left side of my head, and with his other hand he just like started pressing in right below this ear, and just like started getting harder and harder and harder. And it like I could feel my eardrum, like the pressure start building here. And it was like right on the nerve, so it really hurt, and started screaming. He was pushing so hard into my nasal cavity that my nasal airways were completely blocked. I don't think I was getting enough oxygen. But there was another sheriff's deputy standing there. And I could feel that my right side of my face wasn't working anymore.
First he put me in a headlock, and then he proceeded pressing really hard with his fingers here and sort of moving them up and down and sideways. As somebody who has given birth, the level of pain was like beyond that.
I'm here in solidarity with the fight against Line 3, demanding the end of this pipeline, the end of settler colonialism and extraction across the globe.
Oh, can't breathe, you're covering my mouth.
You are hurting him!
That's the point. It's called pain compliance.
After they thought that it was long enough, they left me and said, I'll give you a minute to think about that. They moved on to the person that was on the other side of me, who was a woman.
And then they came around to me a second time and focused on a pressure point that was right under my nose and above my lip.
And he took my head again and started pressing on my pressure point again. And then I felt him put all of his weight on it. And that's when I got really scared, and I kind of felt like my eardrum was gonna break. And then he moved to my teeth, and like right here, and like started pressing up into my nose. And I felt my my teeth were gonna fall out.
When I saw the doctor, I tried to explain what had been happening to me, and he informed me that I had Bell's palsy, that it could be temporary or it could be permanent, that this could be for the rest of my life.
They did give me the diagnosis of Bell's palsy on the right side of my face. They got me off the bed and put me back in cuffs and took me to the jail. And when they tried to take my mugshot, I really tried to smile the entire time they were trying to take the picture, because even when I do it now, you can see that this side of my face doesn't move. I was charged with felony theft, which has a maximum penalty of up to 10 years in prison. I was charged with gross misdemeanor trespass on critical infrastructure at the behest of energy companies to specifically criminalize people who are fighting fossil fuel projects and fighting energy projects. These charges and the actions of law enforcement, people should see that it's actually a growing trend. So while the state of Minnesota, while the Biden administration, while the US government decides to expand fossil fuel infrastructure and allow companies to destroy the water and destroy the earth, while they fail to do their job to protect the earth, people are having to protect the earth on their own, and we're being called terrorists.
So in part 2 of this video, we're going to be digging more into the tools of the state and state surveillance. So to give you a quick rundown of some of the major pinpoints of the history of surveillance, at least in the US, let's do a quick rundown of the history of state surveillance, at least when it comes to the US, over the last 60 years. So from 1956 to 1971, as far as we know, the government launched COINTELPRO. J. Edgar Hoover launched COINTELPRO counterintelligence program, which was designed to disrupt, misdirect, and neutralize domestic political groups, especially Black, Indigenous, and anti-colonial and leftist movements. Some of the targets were the Black Panther Party, the MLK, SCLC, Nation of Islam, SNCC. And these tactics included illegal wiretaps, mail surveillance, planted informants, forged letters, smear campaigns, and assassinations. And this was exposed in 1971 by the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI when they broke into a Pennsylvania FBI office, revealing COINTELPRO files. Fast forward to the 1980s and the 1990s, we have Reagan era and the Intelligence Authorization Acts. In 1978, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act was reinterpreted during the Reagan administration to permit broader domestic surveillance under national security claims. In 1981, Reagan signs Executive Order 12333, allowing U.S. intelligence to spy on Americans without warrants if data is incidentally collected during foreign surveillance. Some of the targets for this included Central American Solidarity activists, anti-apartheid movement activists, environmental groups especially, and Black radical scholars. And this led to the rise of the Joint Task Force, which formalized the collaboration between the FBI and local police departments. Fast forward to the 2000s and the 2010s, post 9/11, surveillance state. Obviously, 9/11 happened, and afterwards, the U.S. went fucking nuts when it comes to surveillance. I mean, in October 2001, we passed the Patriot Act, which drastically expanded government power to surveil phone, email, financial, and medical records without warrant. In 2002, we passed the Homeland Security Act, which created the Department of Homeland Security, using federal and local intelligence for counterterrorism. In 2008, we see the FISA Amendments Act, which legalized a mass collection of digital surveillance. What this era led to were fusion centers, which were created to combine local, state, and federal data on potential threats, often targeting protests. We also saw the NYPD's demographics unit from 2003 to 2013, which surveilled Muslim communities, student groups, and mosques. This also led to certain elements of this Green Scare continuing and environmental movements being targeted, activists being labeled as eco-terrorists, Black identity extremists, and domestic terrorists. I mean, does anyone, you remember under Trump, the BIE stuff, Black identity extremists? What was wild to me about that stuff is I knew people that were organizers and they put Black identity extremists in their profile. I'm like, you want to be identified as that? Okay. We can see 2013 to 2016 as the Snowden revelations and the rise of BLM. So in June 2013, Edward Snowden leaks classified NSA documents exposing secret programs like PRISM and XKeyscore, which monitored emails, texts, metadata, and global internet traffic. This led to public outrage, lawsuits. Simultaneously around this time, the BLM movement cropped up with the killings of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. And best believe the Black Lives Matter movement was documented. I mean, in Ferguson, police, National Guard swooped in. I think they were also given I don't know why I'm thinking martial law, a state of emergency, social media, live streaming. I think social media being a tool of the BLM movement made social media scrubbing much more of a thing. Like we think about the rise of Twitter and live streaming and community investigative journalism. There were also Ferguson activists that were surveyed for a number of years. And there's many different cases of people years later showing up dead and the circumstances of their death being very, very murky. So we can look at BLM as a clear example. And around this time, this really leaned into the state rebranding dissent as a political riot or threat, which therefore justifies more surveillance. The U.S., I mean, what do we got? We have the 2020 uprisings, which were a massive response to the police murder of George Floyd, where millions protested around the U.S. This led to drones being used by Customs and Border Patrol to fly over Minneapolis protests. It led to protesters being tracked by facial recognition software like Clearview AI. It led to the FBI and the DOJ filing charges against hundreds of protesters. And this really was a period of time where I think since the public was trying to push back against defunding the police, it's like the boomerang effect. It's only a matter of time until they go the opposite direction. I mean, 2020 happened. Biden was president. The liberals and the progressives and the Democrats were, oh my God, we care. Let's fight for reform. And then you put in Kamala to try and win against Trump. And then now Trump is in office and all this AI shit is happening and crypto's going up. And so now I think we're really in a period of time where I think we have to be worried about AI. We have to be worried about drones, and we have to be worried about how AI and tech and predictive policing is going to continue to confirm the biases of the white ethno-state that we live under. And I've talked about it in other videos. I've talked about Clearview AI. I've talked about facial recognition and detection. I've talked about Elon and what different companies want to do. Just as radicalism is a continuum, state violence is a continuum. So are you gonna go this way or this way when it comes to state violence? Are you gonna fight it? Or are you gonna be part of the continuum that is afraid? Or are you gonna be part of the continuum that is rising up? Fuck COINTELPRO. Fuck Pegasus. Fuck fusion centers. Fuck you. We're fighting back. When we talk about policing, I think it's important to understand that there's like inconspicuous surveillance and conspicuous surveillance. And sometimes police and the state try to survey you inconspicuously, obviously for clear reasons, like they don't want you to know that they're listening so you don't change up your behavior. But conspicuous surveillance, according to the War at Home book that I was reading, this is from like 1999. It's called War at Home, Covert Actions Against U.S. Activists and What We Can Do About It. It's the FBI and police blatantly watched activists' homes, followed their cars, and opened their mail and attended their political events. The object was not to collect information, which is done surreptitiously, but to harass and intimidate. And so it's important to think about in this whole game of like surveillance, whether or not states surveying you or blah, blah, blah. They could be trying to do conspicuous surveillance or they could be trying to do inconspicuous surveillance. And it really depends on what social and political conditions you're facing.
Situation calls for tear gas. It should be readily.
Physical surveillance typically refers to in-person, bodily, and environmental tracking by law enforcement, intelligence agencies, and their proxies. So it can include undercover officers, infiltrators, facial recognition, cameras on street corners, stingrays. And for digital surveillance, we'll be digging into electronic tracking through devices, platforms, and online activity, often without physical presence. And to begin, we're going to talk about CCTVs and street cameras. These are typically the sort of spherical cameras that are in the corners of rooms, or the cameras that are basically at any business or any public setting. These can be easily accessed by police if they contact the businesses or the owners of these cameras and get access to that data. And these cameras are typically digital or analog video cameras with lenses and image sensors that capture visual data.
With this, we're mostly talking about camera networks. A lot of neighborhoods, a lot of businesses, a lot of metropolitan areas have started installing not only CCTV cameras all over the place, but CCTV cameras that involve high-definition video that are networked together, that can have thermal imaging. Maybe they've got AI technology that can identify and track objects or analyze patterns. Sometimes these technologies might belong to law enforcement. Sometimes they might belong to citizens who are sharing that data with the police. So I want to give you some terms to help you identify some of the different cameras out there. So the term bullet camera is going to refer to cameras that are capturing footage directionally. They're called bullet cameras because they're usually in that tubular shape. Dome camera is what it looks like, a dome-shaped camera. And that dome is going to obscure the direction the camera is facing, as well as the number of lenses. Now, there's one particular brand of camera that we keep an eye out for. It's called a Vigilon. And you're never going to see just one Vigilon camera. And you can see it's kind of a dome camera. Other configurations might be more bullet camera-based, or maybe even more domey, for the lack of a better adjective. But you're never just going to see one. There's going to be a whole range of them, and they're going to be connected to some sort of video analytical software that can be used to track a protest, individual protesters, or to track the movements of the protest as a whole. Just a callback here quickly to ALPR cameras. Those are those license plate cameras. Those are also going to be somewhat permanently affixed. And then probably one that you may have noticed, but you didn't have the words to describe, is a pan tilt zoom camera, or PTZ camera. These can be remotely controlled. The operator can pan, all the way around. They can tilt up and down, and they can also zoom in on particular things they're interested in. Some cities have what are called police observation devices, or pods. These are usually clearly marked as belonging to the police department. They may have multiple cameras.
Modern cameras can record in HD or even 4K with infrared, night vision, and sometimes audio capture. Video data is sent to recording and storage devices via cables or wirelessly. And as for these monitoring centers, live feeds can be monitored by human operators or processed by AI algorithms for specific events, behaviors, or license plate reading. And then, in terms of how AI and analytics can interact with CCTVs, advanced CCTV systems use computer vision and machine learning for facial recognition, object detection, behavior prediction, and automated alerts. And some instances where CCTVs have been used when documenting or surveying protesters is in 2019 during the Hong Kong yellow umbrella protests. Police deployed facial recognition enabled CCTV to identify protesters, leading many to wear masks and avoid cameras. And I remember this being a big strategy that was in the news, like the ways that the protesters would flash things back at the cameras or block the line of sight of the cameras or do all different kinds of things to obscure their level of detection in terms of the cameras. Because especially in Hong Kong, CCTVs, like throughout different parts of Asia, CCTVs are everywhere, and they really are it's built into their social infrastructure a bit differently. And there was a lot of news and coverage around what the Hong Kong protesters were doing to stop these CCTVs from documenting them as easily as they could. Another example is in 2009 at the G20 summit protests in London, cameras monitored activist movements and many arrests were aided by surveillance footage. And we can think about so many different instances. I mean, CCTVs and street cameras, I think there's going to be a lot of correlation between this area and then when we talk about digital surveillance and social media scrubbing, because essentially the amount of anonymity you want to have while doing certain kinds of organizing work is very similar to the amount of anonymity you want to have when you're doing work with people in a setting where there might be cameras around and you do or don't want to be identified. And that could be either you telling people like, no, don't photograph people in this fucking space, or this is the area where folks that are down to be photographed are. And so I do think it is important to think about the practices that we have around understanding where cameras are, understanding the capacity for cameras to be used by the state to survey us, and thinking about some of the ways that we can curb this. Our physical disruption. Activists or organizers can obscure cameras with spray paint, stickers, and this can be done through a variety of creative means. You can think about a lot of different ways to do it. I mean, there's silly string, there's spray paint, there's all kinds of things. Is avoiding or minimizing surveillance. So wearing scarves and masks effectively to obscure your facial features to resist facial recognition. And it's also been known like this area of your face is highly detectable. They also say that your ears are highly detectable in terms of what AI recognition can detect in terms of your fucking earlobe. I don't fucking know. Using hats, sunglasses, makeup, or infrared lights to confuse or block camera line of sight or camera algorithms. I also, a year or two ago when I was in New York, I was almost about to work with a fashion designer that designs clothes that have things embedded in the stitching, whether it's the designs or the logos, that actually confuse like the more of the AI facial recognition kind of cameras. So there is actually clothing out there being designed that works towards some of these purposes. And then varying your routes and behaviors. So let's say you need to do some scouting for a certain kind of direct action. Are you going to drive the same exact route, same exact time, at night, going up to the facility, or are you going to vary your route and position? If you're out decorating at night with your friends, are you going to go and decorate the same exact place every single night? If you're going out and collecting flags, are you going to be collecting flags in the same exact way? And some of this is varying your routes. This is just a useful tip if you are experiencing surveillance at all, like changing up the way that surveillance can detect how you move and what your routines are going to be really important. But it's also important when you're doing specific kinds of actions that you need to obscure what people are doing or how they're doing it. Decoys. Groups sometimes send people or objects to distract or confuse surveillance. So if there's an action and there's a mass group of people, maybe a group goes off to the side and looks suspicious while there's another group doing something else. And the cameras are able to be a bit more confused And especially afterwards, when police or whoever else is trying to survey the situation or work on the data that they have, things will be a bit more muddled. Some other things that people do is community monitoring. So looking at your community and noticing where the CCTVs are, marking them down, letting your community folks know. This is especially done in scouting, but I think in over police communities especially, it can be important to know where the license plate readers are, know where the traffic stop cameras are, know where just the random cameras are that have been placed there because of some kind of logic of surveillance or policing. We also have to talk about like doorbell cameras, ring cameras. Like there's a big debate out there about whether or not it's chill to have these on your door, whether or not it opens you up to being someone that is gonna be easily a target of police questioning if something happens in your neighborhood. And then it's also this idea of what does it mean to protect what we own? What does it mean to privatize surveillance and security for our own benefit? And how does privatizing certain aspects of security, even for ourselves, align with the state's logic? Next, let's talk about drones and planes. Drones and planes have been used for a variety of reasons against activists and in protest settings and in surveying people by the cops. Planes are often used to get photographic images of a certain kind of region. It can also be used to scrub the cell phone data of certain cell phones in that area. Drones, which are also known as unmanned aerial vehicles, are kind of the more recent innovation when we think about surveillance and policing. Planes and drones are outfitted with high-resolution cameras, heat sensors, and sometimes facial recognition software. Flying overhead, they record gatherings, zoom in on individuals, and relay footage back to law enforcement or fusion centers. All of that shit is scary as fuck to me. Like, it's absolutely terrifying. And I can say this as someone that there was a protest in the last few years where I left, and me and my comrades were followed by a drone for 2 hours. Little bit idea of what drones and how they are operated and used. Drones are increasingly used to survey protesters, scout activist encampments, and document identities and group behavior. Video can be archived or live streamed to fusion centers, allowing real-time protest repression. Deployed disproportionately in communities of color and against indigenous land defenders and pipeline resistors, some police departments have weaponized drones with tear gas or rubber bullets, which can be used in crowd control experiments. And during the George Floyd protests, the Department of Homeland Security used happened in Minneapolis. In foreign defense actions like Stop Cop City or Line 3, drones were used to fly above camps to surveil the number of people present, track movement patterns, and monitor nighttime activity with thermal imaging. And oh, wait, no. I was watching this video. It was a TED Talk on drone use in public safety. And what I think is so interesting about drones is that, one, it's kind of unprecedented how much the technology around drones are increasing right now. And even in my home city right now, there's a literal factory being built to support drones. But what's wild is that drones, it depends on the state that you live in, what the policies are around the usage of it. But there are websites that can let you know what kind of surveillance kind of systems and technologies have been like bought out by your local police departments. And what I think is interesting with drones is like you could see a drone flying in the sky and you don't fucking know if it's the state's drone or if it's a federal agent drone or if it's just a real estate agent.
Sometimes you might not see the drone. You might hear the drone in the air, or maybe you don't hear or see it. But you might be able to identify the people controlling the drone pilots. Oftentimes, there need to be two pilots at any given time. And so you would look for police standing on the periphery because they do usually have to be within the line of sight of the drone. But they'd be on the periphery holding some sort of remote control device with a screen. And maybe you don't even see those. Maybe you see their vehicle they came in. So we've given you two examples here, the two lower images, showing that you can identify whether the drone is there based on a vehicle marked with the terms UAV or UAS or aviation or even just the logo of a drone.
The anonymity of this form of surveillance is so fascinating and necessary to unpack for me because it is going to be in more parts of the US. And drones are an interesting innovation because they can both be used in militaristic settings, more especially to drop bombs, to drop weaponry on locations, to deliver things. And they can be used to survey and have this more conspicuous surveillance, as I mentioned before. And I think the variety of functions that they offer, the anonymity behind the subject of who is operating the drone, all of that shit is scary as fuck to me. Like, it's absolutely terrifying. Sort of industry behind drones to me is so interesting because once you dig into it, you really find out that there's a lot of tech, like it's being embedded throughout so much more of our policing system. There's an article from EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, that says as of 2024, approximately 1,500 police departments across the U.S. have established drone programs, with several dozen implementing drones as first responders. Like, what the fuck? And even when I was researching this, like I was researching, I think, Cleveland a few years ago, and there were all these articles that were saying, like, Cleveland, we don't have enough drones. Like, are we going to keep up with crime? And I'm like, are you going to keep up with fucking crime? Are you going to keep up with being fucking 1984? Drones, I remember in Standing Rock, were used a lot. Planes and drones were used a lot. They were flying overhead all the time, helicopters. And the drones would be coming, flying down to camp, and you'd be like, oh my God, like, can they see me? And you'd be looking down and trying to obscure your face, and people would wear masks more. The reading and understanding of how to stop drones, I think, is developing and is relatively new. But there are a few simple tips out there that I recommend that people be aware of. Avoid open areas, especially in certain kinds of protest settings. Use covered indoor spaces for meetings if you can. If you are worried about like outdoor drone surveillance, monitor drone presence. There are different apps and radio frequency detectors to spot drones nearby. These are websites that my friends have used where you can look up the different kinds of drones and kind of begin to understand the different kinds of drones that might be operating in your neighborhood. Record drone activities. So if you are maybe beginning to see drones in your neighborhood and they might be following you or your friends or your cars, if there's an instance where you're leaving a protest and a drone followed you, write it down. Note when it started following you, some of the details of the drone, how many people you were with. And I think this is going to be increasingly important the more that drones are being bought by more police departments around the country. And as it's being relied upon more, like I think the whole idea of unmanned policing or AI driven policing is going to be fucking scary. Because I'm like, not only are they going to be surveying you, but it's going to be the eyes in the sky. And there's websites out here that talk about some drone resistant strategies. There's this one by Robin Radar Systems, 10 types of counter drone technology to detect and stop drones today. And this goes into radars. It goes into radio frequency analyzers. It goes into acoustic sensors. And then there is an article that I was reading from California Law Review, and it reads, quote, law enforcement's use of drones to surveil protesters comes with its own host of ethical and privacy concerns. While drones pose unique legal questions, there are numerous similarities between drone data collection and the collection and retention of cell site location information. In a recent case concerning the use of drones as tools for government surveillance, a Maryland district court denied the plaintiff's request to prevent the Baltimore Police Department from implementing an aerial surveillance operation called Aerial Investigation Research Pilot Program. According to the district court, AIR program consists of flying 3 aircrafts operated by a private contractor over Baltimore for a period of 6 months. Each plane would fly approximately 12 hours a day, collectively covering about 90% of the city and capturing about 32 square miles of the city per image every second. And a part of the thing with drone surveillance, like a lot of these other forms of surveillance, is that police will say like, oh, we're doing it for public safety or to survey or blah, blah, blah. They're surveying everyone. They're violating everyone's right to privacy while claiming to target one particular kind of crime or one particular kind of combatant. And if we look at the logic of collective torture and violence, and if we look at what Israel is literally doing in Gaza, they'll bomb a hospital. They'll survey a certain number of people and claim that a terrorist was there. And this is the slippery slope of the logic of policing, of pain compliance, of law and order. Does it really exist if a tool can survey 500 people in a region when the state is claiming that 2 of those people are the target, yet the data and information that is collected from those 500 people is private, is intimate, can be used against them, can be used to entrap certain people and create a certain kind of crisis? And I think that is the scary thing. Like, you can show up to a protest and most likely you're being surveyed by a drone. Most likely you're being surveyed by CCTV. But does the state have the right to survey you? And does it have the right to survey all of the other 500 people in that crowd if they claim that something's about to go down? Like, that really is the logic where I'm like, oh, so y'all knew there was a plan. The police knew there was a plan, right? And they're like, yeah, we knew there was a plan. That's why we're here. That's why we're surveying. Yeah. This is what it comes back to again and again and again. And then moving on to another form of surveillance, we have door knocks and raids. I wanted to mention these because I've mentioned door knocks and raids in a lot of videos, and
What you do is talk to each other. If you talk to each other, I'm sure you'll sell the whole thing amongst yourself. There won't be no problem at all, okay?
here in Ohio, there are different communities that have had experiences with this. And what I want to mention here is that there are kind of typically a few different kinds of door knocks and raids that police do. A door knock, which is soft contact. This is when law enforcement show up at someone's house or workplace to ask questions. It may seem informal, but it's a tactical intelligence gathering method, typically. The goal of this, from the state's logic, can be to build a profile, to intimidate, or fish for statements that they can use later. They might approach it as officers usually saying, "You're not under arrest," or "We just want to talk." They may appear friendly or ask about your activism, your friends. The goal is to build a profile, to intimidate, to fish for statements that they can later use. And the approach is usually the officers saying things like, "You're not under arrest. We just want to talk." They appear friendly or ask about your activism, family, friends. They try to disarm you. They try to maybe ask or try to have small talk about the day. And these typically don't involve a warrant. Unless they present a warrant, you're not required to let them in or speak to them. And it's important to understand this distinction because a lot of the times that the way the state operates, they try to put on an air of ultimate authority and knowledge of their qualifications and protocols, when in actuality, a lot of legal work and federal work is stretching the boundaries of what people's civil liberties are. And if they don't advocate for themselves, is a hard entry, sudden raid, a raid that involves forced or sudden entries, often early in the morning, typically with a search or arrest warrant. These are known as no-knock raids and have been heavily criticized. Typically, it's police or federal agencies using a battering ram, breaching doors, detaining occupants, seizing electronics, paperwork, banners, clothing, and other evidence. SWAT or specialized units are sometimes used to shock or overwhelm the target, and raids are often tied to broader investigations. And these are known as no-knock raids, which are now restricted in certain jurisdictions, and they can involve flashbangs, surveillance footage, data from previous digital surveillance, etc. In Stop Cop City, one of the big reasons that surveillance happened is that they were observing folks that were doing mutual aid and raising funds to help the movement legally. And these people were surveyed. Their homes were tracked. I think upwards of 6 homes were raided. And they were specifically looking for a person that now is under custody and is currently awaiting their trial. Their name is Jack, and I'll put some information up on screen about them. I think it's really important to note that there is plenty of critique and condemnations of no-knock raids. Breonna Taylor was murdered in a no-knock raid. We can look at what is happening now with ICE and different student activists. I believe it was in Michigan recently. There was a viral video of ICE using battering rams to enter someone's home. We can look at the way that ICE is treating people in their personal vehicles, shattering windows as a sort of form of a no-knock warrant or raid, which in a lot of those instances, we don't know whether or not they actually have a fucking warrant. Is that police come in with an expectation that the person that they're pursuing is criminal or dangerous or might have weapons, and so they react with extreme brute force. I mean, I remember there was a case out of the 2000s where police did a no-knock raid on, I believe it was the wrong home, and they brutalized the grandmother and threw a flash grenade onto the couch where a child was sleeping. And so there are countless implications for how these no-knock raids are just legitimate forms of terror, especially when they're going into people's homes early in the morning. The fact that Breonna Taylor was nude when she was killed, all of these things are just deeply, deeply terrifying and troubling. And the idea that the state is allowed to do this, when if a non-state official does it, it's considered burglary or torture, or there is a legal defense fund piece about no-knock raids, and it's called Breonna Taylor, Amir Locke, and the Danger of Warrant Executions. And this reads, 2 years ago, Breonna Taylor went to sleep, and nearly 2 months ago, Amir Locke did the same. The commonplace, tranquil act of falling asleep in one's own home should not have ended in tragedy, but it did for Breonna and Amir. These tragedies and so many others were the direct result of police callously and recklessly executing warrants. The link between search warrant executions and casualties is not a new one. No-knock warrants have been executed by police with horrifying consequences for decades. Between 2010 and 2016, dozens of civilians and multiple law enforcement officers have died during no-knock raids due to law enforcement's notorious refusal to transparently track information of this sort. We will likely never know the extent of how many people have been lost or harmed because of these executions. This article goes on to talk about how police turn the public into the enemy. Consider this: we all wake up differently. Some people struggle to shake off sleep to the point where it takes minutes for the world to slip into focus. Others are alert more quickly, but even then there's variance. What if they were ill the night before? What if they took medicine that made them drowsy? What if this was their first time sleeping well in days? These factors affect sleep and wakefulness are endless, yet it's clear that when we wake, sleep inertia is routinely present. We know one thing too: police and the system that enables them do not seem to care. The point of no-knock raids is to leverage the element of surprise in order to serve law enforcement interests. This really, think back to what I was saying earlier about pain compliance and the state's monopoly on violence. To have the state exercise the element of surprise in order to shock a subject, and then to use whatever their shock reaction is to justify even more pain and brutality, is literally the definition of a violence worker in so many ways. To violate someone's rights, to go into their home, to take whatever reaction they might have as antagonism and use that as a means to kill them. When we analyze some of these tools, logistically, it can be really insane and hard to even think about, like, what the fuck do we do to react? And I think with something like no-knock raids, that's when kind of the community kind of step in and importance becomes really, really evident, because we need enough study of the ways that the police and the state, and there's some great resources out there about how to react if cops show up to your door. There is a zine, or it's a toolkit from Center for Constitutional Rights called If an Agent Knocks. And this is a great resource that talks about how you shouldn't open the door typically, how you shouldn't even sometimes crack the door because that's a sign of acquiescing in some ways. And this article goes on to talk about best practices. Don't talk to the agents. You have a right to remain silent. This talks about clearly conveying your intent to remain silent by saying, I'm not talking to you. I'd like to talk to my lawyer before I say anything to you. Documenting the situation. These are things that you can do in a situation where if you or someone else is experiencing a door knock and you have the ability to not open the door, document as much as possible. Exercise your right to remain silent and make that verbal. Don't answer questions about others. Don't open the door. Contact a lawyer if you have a lawyer available. If it's a raid, anything can happen. The state can do what it wishes to, but stay calm and silent. Ask to see the warrant that they have. Make sure that it's signed by a judge. Record badge numbers if you can. Try to hold numbers in your head of folks that you want to contact if you are detained. This is something that's just good general advice for any activist. Next tool of surveillance that we want to talk about are license plate readers. License plate reader data enables long-term patterns of life analysis, where someone lives, who they visit, how often they attend certain locations, building a movement profile that can lead to harassment, raids, or doxing. And how license plate readers typically work, there's a kind of box that has a camera that is able to be pointed at a certain location that cars are passing. As vehicles pass, the LPR system takes multiple high-resolution photos per second. Then there's an optical character recognition. This software extracts the license plate number from the image and converts it into machine-readable text.
One of the technologies that we look for are things called license plate readers. Now, these are specialized cameras that are designed to look for license plates, and when it sees a license plate, it will take a photograph, it will digitize the letters and numbers, and upload that information to a database, along with the timestamp and the GPS coordinates. In other words, it will grab the license plate and tell police where and when that license plate was seen somewhere. And that gets added to a database that police can search later on. And we do suspect that license plate readers are being used against protesters. Here's an article from Forward that found that in Long Beach, police were confiscating the vehicles of people suspected of attending a protest. And knowing what we know about how the Long Beach Police Department uses license plate readers, we do believe they are being used. One of the ways that police officers will use license plate readers is by dragging specialized trailers to the entry and exit points of neighborhoods. These will look like speed trailers a lot of the time, where it tells you how fast you're going. In some cases, these speed trailers use radar, but if they're using radar, they're not putting it near a protest. If they're putting it near a protest, it probably is a license plate reader based speed trailer. Police will also attach license plate readers to the tops of their vehicles, and then police will drive around collecting license plates of cars they pass. Now, there's a technique called gridding, where a police officer will systematically go up and down a parking lot or block by block through a neighborhood, collecting everybody's license plates. So if you do see a police vehicle with one of these cameras engaging in that kind of behavior, that could be gridding. So one other element is license plate readers that are attached to stationary locations. We call these fixed license plate readers. And generally, they're attached to street lights or traffic lights, or they might even be attached to a standalone solar-powered pole. You're going to want to look for these perhaps around intersections on the outskirts of protest zones.
Law enforcement's use of automated license plate readers can also be a great deal of harm to protesters' anonymity. License plate readers photograph vehicles and automatically match license plate numbers to aggregated license numbers and vehicle ownership information within law enforcement databases. The COVID-19 pandemic has heightened the privacy implications and concerns regarding the use of these readers, as many protesters are electing to drive to protest rather than march. Furthermore, databases for license plate readers are ripe for security breaches, considering that databases entries are rarely, if ever, deleted, and these databases continue to lack proper cybersecurity measures. And this goes on to explain that there's a distinction between the more targeted license plate readers that are maybe manned by a human or set up in a particular location, and that instead of the targeted automatic license plate reader camera systems that is designed to take photos of license plate, this article says the innovation in this license plate reader kind of technology is that there is a surveillance company called Flock Safety, and it's blanketing American cities with dangerously powerful and unregulated automatic license plate readers. And the distinction with these license plate readers is that Flock is building a giant camera network that records people's coming and goings across the nation, then takes the data available for search by any of its law enforcement customers. Such a system provides even small town sheriffs access to a sweeping and powerful mass surveillance tool, and it allows big actors like federal agencies and large urban police departments to access the comings and goings of vehicles, even in the smallest of towns. This is why it's important to look at the tools, because once you start digging into the tools, you realize there are certain innovations in these tools. These innovations are scrubbing away some of the privacies, inserting certain assumptions around surveillance. And once again, we come back to the sentiment that, is it justifiable for government to survey everyone if it's claiming to target one person in that region? And if that one person's privacy is up for grabs because of our constitutional rights or our civil liberties or the Patriot Act or Pegasus or whatever it is, where's the accountability for indiscriminate surveillance, for indiscriminate tracking? And how can this be used against us? I mean, even think about the fact that right now, they're saying turn off your fucking period tracker app if you're someone that experiences periods. It's because the data throughout all of these corporations and companies are being used for ill will, to target folks later on, to connect them to this scene, to allege that someone was a part of a certain kind of act, or that they transported someone somewhere just based off of where their license plate was. And to do this indiscriminately opens up an endless can of worms. And it really is a part of the core logic of the US to say that our safety matters more than anything else. To hunt down a criminal matters more than anything else. It's literally like I think about what's happening in Israel. Think about what's happening in Israel. Hunting down the terrorist matters more than any human rights violations that a state could do. And if everyone could be a terrorist, that necessitates constant surveillance. And then some simple ways that activists or organizers can combat license plate readers: carpooling with trusted people with vehicles that haven't been flagged or tagged or connected to other events or actions, using public transit or walking to protest actions, politicized areas, And then also checking for visible or mobile license plate readers. Do you understand what this technology looks like? Are you able to detect if cops are using it? Are there ways that you can inform the crowd or folks at a particular event or action that this technology is present? Next, we're going to talk about some of the tools that are used by the state to do digital surveillance. And the reason that we want to talk about digital surveillance is that, similar to physical surveillance, it's used to track movements and behavior, but the government uses digital surveillance to track what people do, where they go, who they talk to, and what they believe through phones, social media, search histories, cameras, and digital communication. How is the state and police surveying our digital devices and our digital lives? So the first tool of this that I want to talk about is facial recognition. So at its core, facial recognition technology maps a person's face features to identify or verify their identity. And this process typically includes facial detection. So the software detects the presence of a human face in a video or image from CCTV, body cameras, phone footage, etc. And then 2, there's facial mapping. So key facial landmarks, the distance between the eye, shape of the jawline, contour of the cheekbones are measured to create a face print.
Moving on to the next technology, we want to talk about mobile biometric devices. And by biometric, we mean technologies that can identify you based on a physical characteristic or behavioral characteristic. So the most common one you might be familiar with are fingerprints. You know, the technology matches various or maps out various parts of your fingertip and then will match your fingerprint to other versions of your fingerprint, perhaps if you'd been arrested earlier or you'd been applied for a job. Face recognition works very similarly, and in which it maybe measures the distance between your eyes and the nose, and then creates a print of that can be matched against other images of your face. Now, specifically here, we're looking for mobile devices that can do face recognition, fingerprint scanning, or other types of biometric collection. And sometimes these devices are going to look just like a cell phone or other device, and you're really going to want to look for how police are using them. So if they're holding them up at eye level, or they're requiring detainees to put their finger on the device. You're also more likely to see these being used after people have been detained. So either they have been put in handcuffs and have arrested, or they've been pulled aside. That's where you might see a law enforcement officer use this technology. To show you what these look like, here's some technology that was used in San Diego. These are just souped up Android phones, but you can really tell that a police officer is doing something special with these phones in order to do face recognition. Some of the devices can do not only face recognition, but fingerprinting. So this device here is a very common fingerprinting device. It is the DataWorks Plus Evolution. You can see that at the little top square there is where a person is required to put their fingerprint to get a fingerprint scan, but on the back of the phone or the back of the device, there's a little lens that will do face recognition. So if you see you might see a police officer using a device to collect, a single device to collect multiple forms of biometrics.
A federal lawsuit has been filed against the Detroit Police Department for their use of facial recognition technology to make arrests.
Other departments across the U.S. are right now facing similar accusations. ABC's Stephanie Ramos has the story.
I lost faith in the justice system to know that you could be locked up for something that you've never done.
This morning, law enforcement's reliance on software that uses artificial intelligence for facial recognition increasingly scrutinized amid legal challenges.
We just want to try to put an end to it.
DeKalb County Police providing this body camera footage of the arrest of 28-year-old Randall Reed in Georgia, misidentified as a theft suspect for a crime committed in Louisiana.
I was confused because I have never been to Louisiana.
Reed says he was detained in jail without bond for 6 days, now pursuing legal action against the deputies in the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office after their failure to reveal that the facial recognition technology was the only source linking him to the crime. The ACLU says Reed is among at least 5 black plaintiffs nationwide who have also filed lawsuits against law enforcement, citing wrongful identification by the AI-powered technology.
Disturbingly, it makes more mistakes when trying to identify darker skinned people, black people, other people of color, and women. So you have police relying on flawed and biased technology to make extraordinarily consequential decisions.
Reed's lawsuit stating black individuals are up to 100 times more likely to be misidentified by facial recognition systems than white men. The first lawsuit of its kind emerging from a 2020 incident seen here in this footage, showing 43-year-old Robert Williams being mistakenly identified as a theft suspect and arrested by Detroit police.
I'm like, you gotta at least tell her where you're taking me.
In 2019, Michael Oliver was wrongfully arrested and accused of larceny in a case he says he knew nothing about. And similarly, in February of this year, Portia Woodruff arrested in a suspected carjacking, later released with charges dropped once police realized she was 8 months pregnant and the suspect wasn't.
Oh, like back in the day, people were robbing banks because you could rob them easier because they didn't have cameras, and then they had cameras, but then how good was the footage? And now they have good footage, and now they can literally just map your face. And there's websites you can use on an OPSEC level that allow you to put someone's photo in and search them across the internet. So even on a civilian level, facial recognition is becoming more and more embedded. I mean, think about the fact that the algorithms in your phone can detect what faces are on your profile or in your saved images. And to me, facial recognition is scary because the idea of cameras being present is just so much more commonplace. The minuscule nature of the body cam, the ways that cops hold up cameras at protests, journalists at protests documenting alt-right or non-state actors showing up and documenting. The threat of facial recognition, I think, is equal to the threat that facial recognition can lead to doxing. The idea that there are private companies that are producing lists of protesters from the student encampments last year and handing that over to the government, and how those students are probably the students of coming back to some of the ways that activists can combat this, beyond the sheer necessity of masking in order to protect each other on a health level. Masking, sunglasses, hats, or anti-surveillance masks can help break up this facial data detection kind of potential part of the process. I do think the masking element can be a little bit tricky because sometimes when people mask, it is a sign of intent by the state, and people that have masked at protests have sometimes been targeted. So I think finding interesting and obscure ways to hide your identity, so whether that be going in full block or normie block or whatever it is, consider how you can cover up yourself from beginning to end of an event. Don't post protest photos with identifiable faces even, or use facial blurring tools or obfuscation filters. Limiting geotagged content and metadata, using secure communications so that the data and images and information that you're sharing isn't also a tool to help the state figure out where you were when, and then to be able to use other tools and devices to gather other images as well. When we talk about digital surveillance, it's also social media monitoring. Police in the past have been able to use systems like software like Geophedia or a data miner during Ferguson or the Freddie Gray protests in Baltimore to track what activists were talking about, where they were planning things, where they were going to be gathering. And so I do want to make a really important note that when we talk about security culture and what we post about or how we talk about things online, it's not to immediately have you censor yourself, but there is the important function of social media scrubbing and surveillance that, one, the state is trying to power map and figure out who knows each other and how and why and how often they communicate. Two, the state is most likely trying to find information and data around the things that we're planning in order to show up early or effectively in order to intervene. And then three, it's about protecting the people that we know through what we post and how we post it, and learning how to obscure things accordingly. And so I think it's really important to think about what your best practices with social media are. Some basic best practices might be not taking images, photos, or videos of you outside of your home. Others might be not taking photos or images of you at protests. especially while you're there at the actual location, but even afterwards. Phone surveillance, the other ways that looking at phone surveillance. So what are some of the things that police can acquire if they're able to get access to your phone or able to use software to get onto it? There are a couple of things.
That whenever they see a vehicle that has an antenna or a satellite dish, that it might be a technology called a stingray. I'm going to talk about stingrays for a moment. So stingrays are also called IMSI catchers or cell site simulators, but essentially these are technologies that police use to surveil people's phones. Stingrays pretend to be cell towers, people's phones connect to them, and that's how police get data from people's phones. Few things to know. First of all, these are not going to be, these are generally not going to be visible to an observer, mostly because either they're kept inside of police vehicles or they might be in aircrafts. We've seen the cell site simulators that are so small that they can fit in somebody's jacket pocket. Really, to detect the use of one of these technologies while at a protest, you need some sort of specialized equipment. But, to be honest, a lot of the use of cell site simulators tends to come out through litigation, through court filings, or through Freedom of Information Act requests.
So moving on in terms of phone surveillance, when the police are trying to track where you are, there are a few different ways that they can do it. They can do cell tower triangulation.
Unencrypted text messages are stored by phone companies and others. In the U.S., agencies like the NSA can capture some unencrypted messages as they travel over the network, and police can serve warrants for unencrypted messages from your phone company.
And then with phones, there's also spyware and malware. So this is when they install phishing, malicious links, or have physical access to your phone. Some examples of this is NSO's groups Pegasus, which can read text, emails, activate camera, mic, and track GPS without user knowing, and this has been used against journalists, organizers, etc. Then when we're thinking about phone surveillance, there are a number of ways that we can begin to combat this. Like I said, using signal or encrypted forms of messaging, turning off your location services on your apps, not bringing your main phone to your protest. Maybe you have a burner that is selectively used for actions or particular kinds of situations to help keep all of the information on your regular phone way safer. And some of the best practices for having a burner phone is buy it in a way that involves cash, start it in a way that doesn't require your name to be immediately identifiable to it, and only use the phone in locations or places that you don't use your regular phone, and be very careful about that last step. Turning off your biometrics, don't unlock your phone with your fingerprint or your face. Have a long password that is at least 10 characters, different kinds of characters. You usually should have some kind of quotation marks, etc., numbers, to give you a really strong password to make it more impossible for them to be able to access your information. This one is more about how police can get access to data and information from companies. It's their methodology of serving a subpoena to tech companies for relevant activist information, And how cops can do this is, at its core, a subpoena is a legal demand that compels a person or entity to provide documents or records to testify under oath. And subpoenas are frequently used to request user data from tech companies, and they don't always require notifying the user, especially if gag orders are attached. And when law enforcement serve a subpoena to a company like Google, Facebook, Apple, Twitter, they can demand different types of user data, including name, email, phone number, IP address, device info, payment info, metadata, timestamps, location data, contacts, photos, camera with higher legal thresholds. They can access emails, DMs, files stored in your cloud, messages, sometimes even deleted ones. Google and Meta publish transparency reports that show thousands of requests fulfilled every year, even for politically sensitive cases. And the reason that this is so important is that this is why the deeper elements of security culture become so necessary. How are we studying the tools that we're using? How have these tools been targeted by the state in the past? How have the boards and the creators and the companies behind these tools reacted in reference to being targeted by subpoenas? And I've mentioned in previous videos, like, one of the reasons that people tend to trust Signal so much is that Signal has showed time and time again in the past that they are not going to bend to a subpoena. And even if they can reveal the information that the state wants on some level, they really can't, because it's end-to-end encrypted. They don't have it. The founders of Signal have done numerous interviews defending this logic, which says If we allow the state to enter our private lives with total transparency and without any rules, checks or balances or anything, without anything pushing back, including tech, that creates authoritarianism. It creates the foundation for increasing fascism. It dissuades people from exercising their right to dissent. And that alone means that we should be studying the companies that we're using to store our notes, the companies that we're using to store our photographs, the devices that we're using, the VPNs that we're using especially. All of these are things that it's potentially detrimental to movements if these movements don't research how protected they are when they're using certain kinds of security culture tools.
A year ago, the Black Panthers were much more active. You heard much more about that type of struggle. Is the time of the Black Panthers past?
The Black Panthers still exist, and the Black Panthers are still extremely active in the Oakland community and in communities all over the country. I'm not sure whether you are aware of what is now happening in the Black Panther Party and the kinds of things that members of that party are doing now.
No, but tell me.
First of all, if you're going to talk about a revolutionary situation, you have to have people who are physically able to wage revolution, who are physically able to organize and physically able to do all that is done.
Yeah, but the question is more, how do you get there? Do you get there by confrontation, violence?
Oh, is that the question you were asking?
Yeah.
See, that's another thing. When you talk about a revolution, most people think violence, without realizing that the real content of any kind of revolutionary thrust lies in the principles and the goals that you're striving for, not in the way you reach them. On the other hand, because of the way this society is organized, because of the violence that exists on the surface everywhere, you have to expect that there are going to be such explosions. You have to expect things like that as reactions. If you are a black person and live in the black community all your life and walk out on the street every day seeing white policemen surrounding you, when I was living in Los Angeles, for instance, long before the situation in LA ever occurred, I was constantly stopped. No, the police didn't know who I was, but I was a black woman and I had a natural, and they, I suppose, thought that I might be a, quote, militant. And when you live under a situation like that constantly, and then you ask me, whether I approve of violence. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense at all. Whether I approve of guns. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. Some very, very good friends of mine were killed by bombs that were planted by racists. I remember from the time I was very small, I remember the sounds of bombs exploding across the street, our house shaking. I remember my father having to have guns at his disposal at all times because of the fact that at any moment we might expect to be attacked. The man who was at that time in complete control of the city government, his name was Bull Garner, would often get on the radio and make statements like, they moved into a white neighborhood, we better expect some bloodshed tonight. And sure enough, there would be bloodshed. After the 4 young girls who lived, one of them lived next door to me. I was very good friends with the sister of another one. My sister was very good friends with all 3 of them. My mother taught one of them in her class. My mother, in fact, when the bombing occurred, one of the mothers of one of the young girls called my mother and said, can you take me down to the church to pick up Carol? We heard about the bombing and I don't have my car. And they went down, and what did they find? They found. And then after that, in my neighborhood, all of the men organized themselves into an armed patrol. They had to take their guns and patrol our community every night because they did not want that to happen again. I mean, that's why when someone asks me about violence, I just find it incredible. What it means is that the person who's asking that question has absolutely no idea what black people have gone through, what black people have experienced in this country since the time the first black person was kidnapped from the shores of Africa.
Surveillance is often presented as safety, a camera on every corner, a new app that helps you report suspicious activity, the facial recognition that sends cops to your neighborhood, the license plate reader that records every single license plate in your neighborhood, or the new drone system that is being used by the electrical company. But we know that in this country, safety has never been distributed equally, and surveillance is often used against the very communities it's supposedly protecting. It enables the police to bring in violence, whether it's predictive policing in poor neighborhoods, ICE tracking people through data brokers, or the ways that social media is scanned for protest plans. It's clear the state is watching. But in part 3, we go even deeper. Surveillance is one layer. But what happens when the state sends someone into your space, into your group, into your organization, your protest, your meeting? That's where infiltration and entrapment comes in. If you care about building power with others, you need to know how this works and how to stay grounded when it happens. Thank you for watching part 2 of Security Culture 101 as a part of this Direct Action series. If you haven't watched the other videos in this series, check out the playlist and stay tuned for part 3, which will be about infiltration and entrapment, how the state undermines trust. Thank you for watching another video on my YouTube channel. If you like the topics and discussions explored on my YouTube channel, you might want to check out another media project that I've been working on for a while. It's called The Dugout, a Black Anarchist podcast. It's a podcast centered around Black anarchism, decolonization, praxis around grassroots movements, studying radical literature and history. And I do the podcast with my co-host Jordan. It's a weekly podcast. We do interviews. We've talked to former Black Panther Party members. We've talked to grassroots farmers, Sudanese anarchists, and so many others. And we try to make it a mix of serious political conversations and finding interesting ways to look at history, contemporary media, and beyond. So if you love this channel and you want to support something else I do, check out the link in my description to find out more about The Dugout. Listen to us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Just look up The Dugout, a Black Anarchist podcast, and enjoy. It's a project of my heart, and I consider it kind of a close companion piece to this channel. And a lot of my videos from this channel also show up on The Dugout. So it's kind of another way of supporting me and my work if you wish. So once again, check out The Dugout podcast, and thank you for watching.